Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The restaurant was silent, save for the low hum of soft jazz and the occasional clink of cutlery against porcelain. At the far end, by the large glass window overlooking the city skyline, John Maxwell sat in eerie stillness. A full plate of delicately plated sea bass and truffle mashed potatoes sat untouched in front of him, its steam long vanished. He stared through the window, not at the skyline, but into something far beyond it, into memory. His fingers were curled loosely around the base of a wine glass, though the glass hadn't been lifted in over 20 minutes. To the waiter who had served him for years, this was routine. John came to the same table twice a month. He ordered the same dish. He never touched it. 10 years ago, this had been his family's favorite restaurant. Now, it was a place he visited to remember what warmth used to feel like. He saw her smile again, Lillian, seated across from him, hair curled just slightly, laughing as she tried to coax their 6-year-old son Robert into trying something other than fries. But they were no longer here. The seats remained empty, like echoes of joy that once was. John exhaled through his nose slowly, chest rising and falling like a man tired of carrying invisible weights. He wasn't starving for food. He was starving for something far deeper: connection, presence, even pain. At least pain meant you were alive. "Mr. Maxwell," the waiter said gently, walking over. "Shall I pack it for you, as usual?" John blinked out of his trance. "No." "Leave it," he said softly. Then after a pause, his voice broke through again, lower this time. "Do people ever change?" The waiter tilted his head. "Sometimes, if they have reason to." John didn't reply. He turned his head back toward the glass. Outside, the night was clear. Inside him, it was not. He wasn't sure why he kept returning here. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe in defiance of forgetting. But mostly, it was for that single moment he could close his eyes and pretend he was still the man who once had everything, and hadn't lost it all in a blink. He didn't know yet that his reason was about to walk through that very door. The evening air was crisp as the restaurant's heavy glass door swung open, ushering in the quiet figure of a young woman with a bundled child clutched to her chest. Emily Dawson stepped inside tentatively, the scent of grilled sea bass and roasted duck flooding her senses. It made her stomach curl, not from appetite, but from shame. Her clothes were clean but worn, sleeves too long and neckline stretched, the kind of garments that whispered of harder times. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Still, desperation had long since stripped her of pride. She didn't want money. She didn't even want pity. But she had seen the plate from the outside window, still untouched, steam now gone, sitting in front of a man who looked more like a statue than a person. His eyes were fixed on the horizon. There was something in that gaze that struck her, not arrogance, but absence. Carefully stepping past the maître d', who didn't bother to look up, Emily approached the table, her voice barely audible. "Sir, may I have your leftovers?" John Maxwell turned slowly, caught off guard not by the request, but by the voice. It wasn't begging. It wasn't rehearsed. It was soft, respectful, so different from the countless hands that had once reached for him when he had wealth to offer. His eyes fell on the baby first, cheeks pink with cold lids drooping with exhaustion. Then he looked up. Emily's face was pale, her lips cracked, but her chin was held up, somewhere between fragile and defiant. "You want this?" he asked quietly, nodding at the food. She nodded once, quickly. "Not for me. For my son." Her voice trembled at the last word. John said nothing. A long silence passed between them, like the moment before a dam breaks. The waiter had stopped behind the counter, watching discreetly. Finally, John lifted his hand, not to offer the plate, but to summon the waiter. "Pack this," he instructed, "and add a new plate. Something warm. She's not leaving empty-handed." Emily blinked in confusion. "I didn't ask for charity." John's gaze softened just slightly. "I know. That's why I'm giving it." And as the waiter moved swiftly, John turned away again, but something in his chest, dormant for years, stirred like embers catching air. The silence returned as Emily stood there, unsure whether to sit or vanish into the shadows again. She gently rocked Noah, who had begun to fuss softly, his small fists curling against her chest. John didn't look back at her immediately. He sat still, as if stunned by something he couldn't explain. There had been thousands of faces in his life, colleagues, investors, opportunists, but her eyes haunted him in a way none ever had. They weren't pleading. They weren't manipulative. They were tired, yes, but there was still light in them. A determined, unyielding flicker that reminded him, painfully, of Lillian. She used to look at Robert that way when he cried, half worried, half whispering to herself. "I'll figure it out." Without thinking, John spoke again, his voice a whisper. "What's his name?" Emily looked down. "Noah," she replied. "He's just turned one." John nodded slowly, something tightening in his throat. When the waiter returned with a carefully packed meal and an extra bag containing hot soup, bread, and juice, Emily hesitated. She didn't want to seem greedy. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the paper bag like it was gold. "Truly." John finally turned to face her fully. "Are you safe?" The question startled her. Not many people asked that. Most wanted to know if she was employed, or worse, why she had a child at all. "We're okay," she said vaguely. "We have a spot, just until I can get back on my feet." John nodded again, though his heart felt heavier. It wasn't his business. She had only asked for leftovers. But something about the way she adjusted Noah's little hat, the way she refused to cry even though her lips trembled, made him feel as though fate had paused to breathe on this moment. As Emily turned to leave, Noah peeked over her shoulder, eyes locking with John's. The child smiled, a fleeting dimpled grin. John didn't realize his hand had clenched until he opened it again. A warmth he hadn't known in years had crept in, uninvited, and left something unfamiliar behind. Ache, yes. But also, hope. That night, John didn't go home right away. Instead, he asked Vincent to take the long way around. As they passed behind the restaurant, the headlights briefly illuminated the narrow alley that snaked along its rear wall. And there she was. Emily sat on a worn patch of cardboard, back propped against a rusted dumpster, her coat pulled tightly around Noah, who slept soundly in her arms. The same meal he had ordered now lay open in front of her, neatly divided into small spoonfuls on a napkin. She wasn't eating. She was feeding Noah first, softly humming a tune that rose above the distant traffic. It wasn't sorrowful, it was gentle, almost sacred. "Stop the car," John said suddenly. Vincent looked back, confused. "Sir?" "Just stop." He peered through the glass, watching as she smiled at the child's sleepy chewing. Then she lifted her head and whispered a short prayer, eyes closed. "Thank you for food, for today, for someone who saw us." She didn't know he was watching. John felt an emotion rise in his chest so quickly it almost made him dizzy. This wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper, recognition. She reminded him of who Lillian used to be before the world knew her name. Of how they once sat on floors, eating cheap takeout while dreaming of owning a single server. Of how Robert used to nestle into her lap the same way Noah now did with Emily. "Drive," John said, voice tight. "Sir, are you all right?" Vincent asked. John didn't answer. He leaned back into the seat and stared at the ceiling, as if fighting an internal storm. "She's not asking for help," he murmured. "She's surviving without it." Vincent hesitated, then glanced back one more time before pulling away. Emily never turned around. She had no idea she had been seen, let alone by the man whose leftovers had just fed her child. But for the first time in years, John felt like he was witnessing something holy. Not in a church, not on a stage, but in the alley behind a restaurant, where a mother thanked the sky with a whisper and a song. John lay in bed, staring at the darkened ceiling of his penthouse, the city lights outside casting pale ribbons across the walls. He hadn't touched the brandy on his nightstand. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see Lillian or Robert, he saw her. The girl in the alley, the soft hum. The cradled child, Emily. Her name echoed faintly in his memory. There was something in the dignity she carried, even while sitting beside a dumpster, that disturbed his carefully constructed numbness. She didn't look broken. She looked unfinished. Like someone holding her breath under water, waiting for a chance to break the surface. John sat up, ran a hand through his graying hair, and reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over Vincent's name. He hesitated, then tapped. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Vincent answered groggily. "Sir, everything all right?" I need you to find someone, John said, voice firm. Discreetly. There was a pause. You mean the woman? You saw her. I caught a glimpse in the alley. She had the baby with her. Find out where she sleeps, where she goes. Don't follow her too closely. Just no. And don't speak to her. Vincent sat up, rubbing his face. Why, John? There was a beat of silence. Then John answered honestly. Because I've seen the world chase after power and forget people like her. I don't want to be part of that anymore. Vincent sighed, resigned. All right, I'll be careful. John put the phone down, then stood by the window, watching the quiet streets below. He didn't know what compelled him to ask. He didn't want to own her story or pity her, but something in his soul, the part that used to write love notes on napkins for Lillian, the part that read bedtime stories to Robert, was stirring after a decade of silence. He didn't want to intrude. He just didn't want her to disappear. Not like the others had. And so, in the quiet stillness of his penthouse, with ghosts resting in framed photographs behind him, John Maxwell took his first real step toward the living. Emily sat on a concrete ledge behind an old condemned warehouse, its broken windows covered with faded tarpaulin. A rusted chain hung loosely over the gates, though no one ever enforced it. The city had forgotten this place long ago. It was cold that morning, and her fingers trembled as she wrapped another layer of cloth around Noah's tiny frame. He whimpered softly, nestling deeper into her chest. Just a little longer, sweetheart, she whispered, brushing a kiss onto his forehead. Mama's trying. She adjusted her backpack to serve as a pillow beneath them. This was the best she could offer him for now, a dry corner, warmth from her own body, and lullabies layered with hope. She'd refused the shelter 2 blocks down. The last time she'd stayed there, a man had tried to snatch Noah while she was asleep. Since then, she trusted only the silence of forgotten places. Her breath fogged in the air as she opened the small notebook she used to keep records, food stamps, job prospects, prayer lists. On the last page was a worn ultrasound photo, barely visible now. You weren't supposed to be here like this, she said quietly to her son, who blinked up at her, unaware of the world's sharpness. But we're going to make it, I swear it. Emily leaned her head back against the brick wall and closed her eyes briefly. Listening to the city wake up around her, the distant siren, the garbage truck clanking down the street, someone coughing nearby. Life moved on, and she would too. Even if no one saw her, even if everyone assumed she was just another cautionary tale, they were wrong. She wasn't ruined. She was rising, just slowly, carefully, and for him. Across the street, hidden behind tinted glass, Vincent observed quietly from the car. His hands remained on the wheel, but his face had softened. She's not what I expected, he murmured to himself. She's stronger. He snapped a quick photo of the building, then pulled away without being seen. No reports, no interference, just as John requested. Yet even he couldn't help but feel unsettled. The woman wasn't asking for a miracle. She was making one with what little she had. And somehow she made it look like grace. Emily stirred at dawn, awakened by the rustle of something nearby. She reached instinctively for Noah, her fingers wrapping around his bundled form. Safe, still asleep. Then she saw it, a plain grocery bag, carefully placed near the side of the wall where she often set her backpack. Her heart raced. She looked around, expecting to see someone lurking, but the alley was still. Warily, she approached it. Inside were diapers, 2 cans of formula, a baby spoon, a thermos of soup still faintly warm, and a folded note without words. Just a single yellow smiley sticker pressed to the paper. She stared at it for a long time. No name. No explanation. Only thoughtfulness. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was someone watching her? Was this pity in disguise? But then Noah stirred and let out a quiet, hungry cry, and that worry melted away like ice in sun. She knelt, unscrewed the thermos, and poured a bit into the lid to taste it. Still warm. Fresh. She fed Noah slowly, each spoonful gentle and precise, her own hunger held at bay by the soft coos of her baby's satisfaction. "Who are you?" she whispered to no one. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice caught in her throat. She sat down fully, legs crossed, and laid the note across her lap. It was blank, and yet it said more than most of the conversations she'd had in the past year. It said, "You matter. I see you. I care." Not in words, but in the way the bag was packed, in the size of the diapers, in the inclusion of a baby spoon that showed someone had really looked. She pressed a hand over her mouth and tried not to cry, but a single tear slid down anyway. Noah reached up and brushed at her cheek with clumsy fingers. Emily let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. Guess we've got a guardian angel now, huh? She tucked the empty thermos back into the bag and folded the paper gently, tucking it into her journal. She didn't know who left it, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel entirely alone. Somewhere in this sprawling, indifferent city, someone had noticed her. And for now, that was enough to keep her standing. The morning after his quiet surveillance, Vincent stood beside the Bentley, arms folded, his posture unusually rigid. John approached with his usual air of detachment, black coat sharp against the rising sun. "You found her," John said without looking up. Vincent gave a short nod, but his voice held weight. "She's staying in a condemned lot off Crestwood. No shelter, no running water. She keeps the baby swaddled in layers of cloth and old curtains. No one else is with her, but she's alert. She checks everything twice before she sleeps." John paused. "She's careful. That's good." Vincent hesitated, then added, "It's not sustainable. One hard night, one sick day, and that child doesn't make it." John exhaled through his nose. "I know." There was a silence between them. The car engine idled. "Why her?" Vincent finally asked. "You've walked past hundreds of people. You never asked about them." John leaned against the car, the cool morning air brushing against his neck. "She didn't ask me for money. She didn't even ask for help. She asked for food, not for herself, but for her son." He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers as though trying to shake off a memory. "I saw something in her, something I lost a long time ago." Vincent's voice softened. "That something won't come back just because you help her, John." "I'm not looking to fix myself," John replied, almost bitterly. "I'm just not ready to watch someone else be forgotten while I sit behind glass walls." Vincent studied him quietly, then said, "Then tell her. Tell her it's you helping." John's eyes darkened. "No, if she knows, she'll change. She'll look at me differently. This isn't about recognition. It's about redemption." Vincent opened the driver's door, but stopped short. "Then just make sure, whatever this becomes, you're not doing it to rewrite the past." John didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, where the morning light was beginning to wash over the skyline, hoping it might wash something clean in him too. The pen scratched across the worn page, the ink shaky from cold fingers. Emily's journal had become her only safe place, her therapist, her confessional, her time capsule. Each night, when Noah finally fell asleep curled into her chest, she'd write to him. Not because he could understand, but because one day he might read it and see that he'd always been her reason. Tonight, the page was smeared where her fingers had brushed away tears. "Dear Noah," she wrote, "today someone gave us a gift. I don't know who, but it made me believe there are still people out there who care. Maybe one day you'll be the one to give someone else hope. I want to believe you'll grow up kind. I want you to never be afraid to care." She paused, looking down at him, one chubby hand splayed over her coat. "You're my beginning again," she whispered aloud. She tucked the journal back into her backpack, alongside the folded note she still hadn't parted with. Some part of her wondered if writing was pointless, if anything she did would matter in the end. But writing kept her sane. It reminded her she was more than a statistic. It reminded her she still had a voice. The last thing she wanted was to let life turn her invisible. She remembered how it felt to be loved once, before her family turned their backs, before Daisy slammed the door and said she was ruining her life, before Vivian's cold silence replaced motherly warmth. "No one roots for the girl who got pregnant without a ring," she muttered bitterly, adjusting Noah's blanket. But then she sighed and added, "But you know what, Noah? I'm still rooting for me." The sky outside was deep indigo, stars faint against city haze. Her breath fogged as she leaned back and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, and she'd rise again with tired feet and trembling hands, because she had no other choice. And because somewhere, maybe, someone believed she was worth seeing. The wind howled like a warning through the alleyways, sheets of rain pounding the city as night fell fast. Emily cradled Noah tighter, her shirt soaked through, her hair clinging to her face. His skin was burning. He had been crying for hours now. He was barely making a sound, his head limp against her shoulder. "No, no, no, baby, stay with me," she whispered, rocking him as she stumbled beneath the shelter of a narrow eave. The formula hadn't stayed down. His eyes fluttered, barely opening. Panic gripped her chest like iron. She couldn't afford an ambulance. Couldn't walk into a hospital without questions she couldn't answer. Her own fever dreams had begun, but this was different. This was real. This was danger. Please, not him too. Her voice cracked. Her shoes squelched as she began running, through puddles, past strangers who didn't stop. She needed help. But who would listen? Across the street, inside a black SUV parked beneath a parking structure, John watched the chaos through fogged glass. He hadn't meant to be there. He'd only asked Vincent to pass by the area once more. Now, he was gripping the door handle, his pulse racing. "Vincent, get the doctor now." Vincent didn't question him. John stepped out into the rain, his coat immediately soaked. He approached slowly. Emily was on her knees now near a corner bench, struggling to remove her jacket to wrap it around Noah. "He's burning up," she whispered through tears. "I don't know what to do." She didn't look up. She was too focused on the child. John didn't speak. He knelt beside her, shielding them both with his coat, and gently placed his palm to Noah's forehead. The heat made his stomach drop. "A pediatrician is on the way," he said quietly. She looked up sharply, startled. "Who are you?" John held her gaze. "Just someone who's not letting him die tonight." He didn't offer comfort. He offered certainty. And that was the one thing she needed more than anything. Someone who wouldn't disappear in the storm. The scent of antiseptic lingered as Emily sat in a small waiting room with pale green walls and cushioned chairs that felt too soft for someone like her. Noah slept fitfully on her chest, his fever reduced but his body still too warm, his breathing shallow but less frantic. She kept glancing at the door, her mind filled with questions she couldn't shape into words. They hadn't come in an ambulance. A black car had taken them from the street, and a nurse had already been waiting when they arrived. No forms, no insurance questions, just immediate care. "I don't understand," she said aloud, mostly to herself. The receptionist looked up. "Ma'am?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing. Sorry." Her fingers tightened around the edge of Noah's blanket. This clinic wasn't one she'd ever dared to approach before, private, quiet, too far above her reality. But now, here she was. Someone had made sure of it. When the door opened, a gentle-faced doctor in navy scrubs entered. "Ms. Dawson?" he asked, glancing at a clipboard. "Your son's fever has stabilized. You got him here just in time. We've given him fluids and medication, and he's resting comfortably." Relief crashed over her so fast she had to grip the chair to keep from sliding to the floor. "Can I see him?" she asked, her voice catching. "Of course. But there's something you should know. The bill has already been paid, entirely." Emily froze. "By who?" The doctor smiled faintly. "They asked to remain anonymous. But they've covered the cost of tonight and follow-up treatment, if necessary." Emily didn't speak. Couldn't. Her throat tightened as she stood slowly. "Can I thank them?" she asked softly. The doctor shook his head. No name was given. "But it seems they're watching out for you." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and followed the doctor down the hall. She paused before the room where Noah lay, warm under a blanket, IV attached, face peaceful for the first time in days. She pressed a hand against the glass and whispered, "Thank you. Whoever you are, thank you." Morning sunlight filtered gently through the clinic's frosted windows as Emily adjusted Noah in her arms, the nurse handing her a fresh bottle and a list of post-care instructions. She clutched them like sacred texts. "You're free to go whenever you're ready," the nurse said kindly. "A car is waiting outside to take you anywhere you'd like." Emily blinked. "A car," the nurse nodded. "He's waiting just out front." Her pulse quickened. She stepped through the clinic doors and saw it, a black Bentley parked by the curb, its driver stepping out calmly. Vincent. He didn't smile, but there was something warm in his eyes. "Miss Dawson," he said, "I'm here to take you home." Emily shifted uncomfortably. "I don't have a home." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Wherever you want to go, then," Vincent replied. "The gentleman asked me to ensure you had a safe journey." Emily hesitated, then climbed into the back seat. It smelled faintly of leather and citrus. She sat stiffly. Noah nestled close. "Are you going to tell me who he is?" she asked. Vincent met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "He's not looking for attention," he said. "Just giving help where it's needed." Emily's brows furrowed. "I don't like being a project." Vincent nodded once. "He doesn't see you that way. I don't either." She looked out the window, watching the city blur by. "It's just, I'm used to people wanting something in return." Vincent didn't respond right away. Instead, he drove in silence for several blocks. Then he said quietly, "Some people give because they've taken too much from the world already. He's one of them." Emily didn't reply, but her fingers curled protectively around Noah's hand. She didn't know who this man was or why he cared. But something about the way this was unfolding, it didn't feel like charity. It felt like mercy, and for now she'd accept that. The cemetery was quiet, carpeted in dew and fallen petals from a nearby jacaranda tree. John knelt beside the grave of his wife, Lillian, one hand resting on the polished stone, the other clutching a single long-stemmed rose. Her name was etched in clean serif script, along with the dates that had torn his world in half. Beside hers was a smaller stone, Robert's. "It's been 10 years, he murmured, voice thin as the morning air. "I've built empires. I've spoken at conferences. I've stood in front of cameras and smiled for people who will never know what it cost me." He paused. "But yesterday, I met someone." He placed the rose gently across the stone. "A young mother. She asked me for leftovers, Lil. Leftovers. And I felt something. Crack." He looked up at the sky, pale gray behind thin clouds. "She has this look in her eyes, fierce. Tired, but alive, and that baby, Noah. He's barely a year old, and yet somehow he's the most resilient thing I've seen since." His voice faltered. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm being foolish. Maybe I'm just trying to stitch together meaning out of whatever scraps the universe gives me now. But when I look at them, I don't see a charity case. I see what I used to have. And for the first time in a decade, Lil, I want to be a part of something again." He rose slowly, brushing his coat free of dew. He lingered one more moment, fingertips brushing Robert's name. "I miss you, every second. But maybe, just maybe, helping her doesn't betray you. Maybe it honors you." As he walked away, a gust of wind lifted the rose slightly on the stone, petals brushing softly over Lillian's name, as though she too had heard his confession. The bell above the diner door jingled as Emily stepped in, Noah secured to her back with a wrap she'd hand-stitched from old scarves. The air was heavy with the scent of grease and burnt coffee. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, and more importantly, it was honest work. The manager, a stocky man named Greg with a face as gruff as his voice, had looked her up and down that morning and said, "You any good with dishes?" She nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "Then don't drop anything. We'll pay cash at the end of the shift." That was all it took. No résumé, no question. Just the chance to work. In the back kitchen, steam clung to the cracked tiles, and dishwater scalded her hands. But with each plate scrubbed clean, each basket dried and stacked, she felt something return to her, a fragment of worth. During her 10-minute break, Emily sat outside by the side door, sipping lukewarm water from a plastic cup. Noah cooed softly, his cheeks full after a shared piece of toast. She looked at him and whispered, "It's not much, but it's ours." A waitress stepped outside for a smoke and paused beside her. "You knew?" she asked, blowing out a stream of smoke. "Yeah, just started today." The waitress studied her. "You got eyes like you've been through hell. You're quiet, but not broken. I like that." Emily gave a small smile. "Quiet's all I've got left." The woman nodded, flicked ash to the ground. "Well, keep showing up. They can't ignore people who work hard forever." As Emily returned to the sink, her arms ached, her back stiff, but her spirit steadied. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't someone stepping in. This was her reclaiming her own life, one dish at a time. And even though she didn't know who had paid the clinic bill or sent the driver, she did know this. Dignity didn't always roar. Sometimes it came as soap suds and minimum wage. The first snow of the season drifted down in lazy spirals, blanketing the city in soft silence. Emily huddled beneath the edge of a bus stop awning, arms curled protectively around Noah as he slept bundled in 3 layers of worn clothing. The plastic bags that held their belongings were tucked beneath her knees to keep them dry. Her diner job paid just enough for food, but nowhere near enough for rent. And so she endured the cold. Her coat had torn days earlier at the seams, and each gust of wind made her teeth chatter uncontrollably. She rocked Noah gently and whispered against his forehead, "Almost there, baby. Spring will come." But she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. When she stood to stretch, something caught her eye at the far end of the shelter near the garbage bin. A box. She hesitated, then approached cautiously. Inside was a neatly folded winter coat, thick and padded, with a faux fur hood. Alongside it, a baby blanket, new, still tagged. She looked around, but no one was nearby. No note, no explanation. Her breath caught in her chest. Slowly, reverently, she lifted the coat and ran her fingers over the fabric. For a moment, she just stood there, holding it to her chest like a gift she didn't deserve. "Why do you keep doing this?" she whispered to the sky. "Who are you?" Noah stirred, letting out a tiny whimper, and that was answer enough. She wrapped the coat around herself and tucked the blanket over him with trembling hands. Warmth. Not just physical, but something deeper. A feeling of being seen. John sat across from Damien in a dimly lit private lounge in Midtown, the flicker of firelight from the built-in hearth casting shadows along the paneled walls. Damien leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink with quiet scrutiny. "You've been different," he said finally. "Missing calls, skipping meetings. You never used to vanish." John swirled his glass of water, eyes distant. "I needed space." Damien raised a brow. "Space from billion-dollar contracts or from yourself?" There was no sarcasm in his voice, just concern. John didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I met someone. Not like that. A young mother. She has nothing. No safety net. But the way she holds her child, it's like the world still owes her hope." Damien leaned forward. "So what? She's your new purpose project?" John's eyes sharpened. "Don't reduce her to that. She's not a project. She's a reminder." Damien let the silence settle between them before asking gently, "Does this have to do with Lillian?" John looked down at his hands. "Everything does. Every breath I take still tastes like the day I lost them. But for the first time, I saw something outside of that. Not a replacement, not a distraction. Just life, real and fragile and fierce." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You want me to come back to the company. But I can't pretend like I'm ready. Not when there's someone out there surviving on next to nothing while I sit in glass towers." Damien nodded slowly. "I won't push you. Just promise me you're not doing this to rewrite the past." John met his gaze, steady and solemn. "No. I'm doing it because I want to stop running from it." He stood, straightened his coat, and added quietly, "There's still someone out there who hasn't stopped fighting. The least I can do is walk beside her, even if she never knows it's me." The phone felt unusually heavy in Emily's hand as she stared at the contact name that hadn't changed in 3 years. Daisy Dawson. Her thumb hovered above the call button, heart thudding like a warning drum in her chest. But Noah had been coughing again, and the winter felt longer than it should have been. The free formula was nearly gone. And sometimes even pride has to be bent for the sake of survival. She pressed call, pressed the phone to her ear, and waited. It rang 4 times before a voice answered, clipped and unmistakably familiar. Emily. The tone wasn't warm. It wasn't even neutral. It was the voice of someone who'd locked their heart in a vault and lost the key. "Hi, Daisy. It's been a while," Emily said softly. "Yeah, it has." Silence stretched, taut as wire. Emily swallowed hard. "I didn't call to fight. I wanted to ask if you could spare a blanket or anything for Noah. It's cold," and Daisy cut in. "Is this really about the baby? Or about you not being able to keep your life together?" The words landed like slaps. Emily's fingers curled tightly around the phone. "He's sick, Daisy. I'm doing the best I can." "You had a choice," Daisy snapped. "You chose to keep him and walk out. Don't come crawling back now that it's hard." Emily's throat burned. "I didn't crawl. I stood. I'm still standing." There was a pause. Then Daisy exhaled, her voice dropping. "I didn't call the day he was born because I didn't want to get attached. Mom made her choice, and honestly, I did too." Emily's eyes filled, her voice cracking. "He's your nephew. You haven't even seen him." Another long silence. Finally, Daisy said, "I hope you figure it out, Emily. But I can't help you." The line went dead. Emily stood frozen on the sidewalk, the wind biting into her skin harder than any insult could. Noah stirred on her back, unaware. She whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." I really thought she might say yes, but there was no reply. Just the sound of cars passing by and the quiet ache of rejection settling in her bones once more. The envelope was cream-colored and unsealed, left carefully inside the diner's employee cubby with her name written in tight, slanted handwriting. Emily found it after her shift, her hands sore and damp from hours of dishwashing. She turned it over several times, frowning. There was no return address, no logo. Just her name, Emily Dawson, nothing more. She tucked it into her coat and waited until she was outside, seated on a curb with Noah resting on her lap, before unfolding the letter. It wasn't long. Just one typed sentence in the middle of the page. "You don't know me, but I see you. Keep going." Her breath hitched as she read the words again. She read them aloud under her breath, barely above a whisper. "You don't know me, but I see you. Keep going." That was it. No signature. No demand. No condition. Just a gentle push from the shadows. Emily blinked back sudden tears and clutched the letter to her chest. It wasn't about the formula or the coat or the meals. This was different. This felt personal, intentional. She had spent so many months being invisible, moving between corners and closed doors, feeling like the only evidence she existed was the baby strapped to her. And now, someone had seen her. Not just noticed, but seen. She looked down at Noah, gently brushing snow from his lashes. "We have an angel, don't we?" she whispered. A part of her still wrestled with distrust. Life had taught her to second-guess miracles. But this wasn't a miracle. It was a message, one that carried no grandeur, just quiet defiance against despair. She folded the letter carefully and slid it into her journal beside Noah's baby photos and her scribbled entries. "If I make it out of this," she whispered, "I'm going to find a way to thank whoever wrote that." She looked up at the sky, darkening with twilight, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely lost. Someone, somewhere, had reminded her that she wasn't walking alone, even if the one beside her never showed their face. It was a Saturday afternoon when it happened, cold but bright, the winter sun casting golden light across the park where Emily often took Noah after her shift. The bench near the pond had become their usual spot. She liked it because it was far from the crowds, and Noah liked watching the birds peck at breadcrumbs people left behind. She sat with him in her lap, helping him sip warm water from a sippy cup she'd found at the thrift store. "You like the ducks, she whispered, brushing a curl from his forehead. "They remind me of you, always looking around, always curious." He giggled, kicking his feet against her leg. Then out of nowhere it came, soft, slurred, but unmistakable. "Mama." She froze. Her heart felt like it stopped mid-beat. "What did you say?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. His face lit up again. "Mama," he repeated, reaching toward her with a sloppy grin. Her eyes filled instantly. "Oh my God. Baby, you said it. You said mama." She laughed through the tears, hugging him tightly, pressing kisses into his cheeks, his nose, his forehead. Her body shook with joy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel tired. She felt full of wonder, of gratitude, of something that had nothing to do with survival. "I don't care where we sleep tonight," she whispered. That was worth everything. Nearby, under the shade of a tree, John sat quietly with a takeaway coffee in his hand. He hadn't meant to follow her today. He just needed to know she was okay. When he heard Noah speak, when he saw Emily's joy bloom like a flower in full sun, he smiled genuinely for the first time in 10 years. The next afternoon, the park bench wasn't empty when Emily arrived. She paused mid-step, spotting the man from the night of Noah's fever, John seated with a cup of tea in one hand, a book closed on his lap. Noah wriggled excitedly on her back. Emily shifted her stance, unsure whether to turn away or speak. Before she could decide, John looked up and met her eyes. There was no pity in his gaze, only calm sincerity. "May I sit with you?" he asked, as if he were the guest at her own table. Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If you don't mind sharing a bench with someone who hasn't had a full night's sleep in a year." John smiled faintly and shifted over. She unwrapped Noah and sat, settling her son beside her. For a moment, there was only quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. The breeze rustled the trees gently, and a pair of ducks waddled across the path. I never got to thank you properly, Emily said eventually. At the clinic, I know it was you. John didn't deny it. He simply looked at her and said, You don't owe me thanks. She studied him carefully. You look like a man who carries a lot but says little. He tilted his head, thoughtful. I lost my family a long time ago. Since then, I've forgotten how to speak in full sentences. Her expression softened. Then maybe we can help each other remember. Noah babbled as if in agreement, grabbing at John's sleeve. For the first time, John didn't pull back. He let the child touch his coat, his tiny fingers brushing against John's hand. He's strong, John murmured. He's my why, Emily replied. And right now, I'm just trying to keep our heads above water. John turned to her then, voice quiet but steady. You're doing more than that. You're teaching him to swim. Something passed between them in that moment. Not romance, not obligation, just a quiet understanding that two lonely souls had begun to share the same bench, the same silence, and perhaps the same hope. They met again the next week, this time under the awning of a closed bakery as a light drizzle painted the city in a silvery sheen. Emily had just finished her shift and carried Noah wrapped close to her chest, while John leaned against the wall with an umbrella and 2 paper bags, one of warm meat pies, the other of mango juice. Peace offering, he said as she approached. No one ever fights over meat pies. She chuckled, accepting the bag with a tired smile. They sat on the steps, eating in silence until Emily spoke, her voice low. I haven't told you much about. Before. John waited. He didn't rush her. My family's not big on forgiveness, she said slowly. When I told them I was keeping Noah, things fell apart. My sister said I ruined my future. My mother told me I embarrassed the family. I walked out with nothing but a bag and a heartbeat inside me. John listened, his face unreadable but not detached. That couldn't have been easy, he murmured. Emily shook her head. It wasn't. But what hurt most wasn't what they said. It was how easily they let me go. Her eyes glassed over, staring at the puddles forming on the sidewalk. Sometimes I wonder if I was ever really theirs to begin with. John's voice came gently, like stepping stones across her pain. Sometimes blood ties are just geography. Family is who stays when it's inconvenient to love you. She looked at him then, surprised by the clarity of the statement. Did someone teach you that? He nodded. My wife. Before I lost her, she taught me everything about love I never learned from being rich. The drizzle continued as they sat side by side, 2 people born from disappointment but slowly, carefully, building something not defined by the pain behind them, but the peace they were beginning to create between them. John didn't speak as the car turned onto a quiet residential street tucked behind the busier parts of town. Emily sat in the back seat, Noah asleep against her, confusion etched across her face. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere better, John replied. They pulled up to a small bungalow, paint slightly faded, but windows glowing softly from within. A single porch light flickered to life. On the windows, pale yellow curtains fluttering gently in the breeze. Emily stepped out slowly, her heart thudding. What is this? John walked around to her side. It's a rental, paid up for the next 6 months. The landlord agreed to let it go month to month after that. Utilities included. She stared at the house, stunned. This is too much, her voice broke. I can't accept this. John stepped closer. You can walk away after tonight if it doesn't feel right. But I saw the way you flinch when Noah coughs in the cold. I couldn't sleep knowing you had no roof. Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes as she turned to him. Why are you doing this? He answered softly. Because someone should have done it for you a long time ago. She nodded slowly, then said with quiet resolve, Just until I'm steady. I need to earn my life back, he smiled faintly. Then consider this your lifeboat, not a rescue. Emily stepped onto the porch, hand trembling as she touched the front door. Inside, the air was warm, clean sheets. A kettle on the counter, a folded note on the table, welcome home. She bent and pressed a kiss to Noah's forehead. We're not there yet, she whispered, but we're finally walking in the right direction. Outside, John stood in the dusk, staring at the light coming through the yellow curtains. It wasn't his house. It never would be. But knowing they were safe behind those walls, just that was enough. The following weeks unfolded in quiet rhythms. John began stopping by the yellow-curtained house, not unannounced, never intrusive. He brought things Noah might need: diapers, fruit purees, even a second-hand toy car with faded red paint. Emily always opened the door with a small nod and a guarded smile, never asking for more than what was already offered. On some days, they sat outside on the porch while Noah played with grass or clung to his mother's leg. Other days, John simply left something by the gate and returned to his car. He didn't speak about his wealth. He didn't offer advice. He just showed up and stayed. And for Emily, who had only ever known help with conditions, this new rhythm was jarring, but also comforting. She began to call him Mr. Maxwell, half out of politeness, half to remind herself that this man, calm, private, observant, was still a stranger. But one afternoon, after he brought her a bag of oranges and a box of second-hand children's books, he finally said gently, "You don't have to keep calling me that." Emily glanced at him. "What should I call you then?" He paused. "John, just John." She considered it for a beat, then nodded. "All right, John." The name felt strange on her tongue, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it made everything feel smaller, closer. "I never expected this," she murmured. "Any of it." John looked down at Noah, who had managed to get one sock off and was chewing on the other. "Neither did I," he replied. But maybe that's how healing begins, when no one's trying to force it. And in the silence that followed, something unseen shifted between them. Not love, not dependence, just the quiet beginning of trust. Emily heard the knock at the door on a Sunday afternoon. Noah was napping, and the kettle had just begun to whistle. She opened it expecting John, but instead froze at the sight of her mother, Vivian Dawson, standing with a clutch bag pressed tightly against her chest. Her eyes, still sharp and calculating, were rimmed with exhaustion. "Hello, Emily." The words were simple, but they splintered something inside her. "How did you? Why are you here?" Emily asked, her voice thick. Vivian's gaze drifted over the tidy living room behind her, the child's toys neatly arranged, the sunlight through yellow curtains. "I heard from Daisy. She said you called." She didn't give details, but I knew something was wrong. I wanted to see for myself. Emily folded her arms. "You mean you wanted to see how far I'd fallen?" Vivian flinched at the words. "No," she said, quieter now. "I wanted to see if you were still you." Emily stepped aside reluctantly, and Vivian entered slowly, like someone stepping into a dream they feared would break. She sat on the edge of the couch, stiff and unsure. "He's beautiful," she murmured, eyes landing on Noah's sleeping form in the bedroom doorway. "You said I ruined the family," Emily replied sharply. "That I was reckless, irresponsible. You didn't even come to the hospital." Vivian closed her eyes briefly, pain lining her face. "I was wrong. I was scared. I thought protecting our name mattered more than protecting you. I see now I was clinging to a version of control that doesn't exist." Emily stared, unsure whether to scream or weep. "You missed everything. His first steps. His first word." Vivian looked up, eyes wet. "I can't go back, Emily, but if there's space, I'd like to witness what's still to come." The house was silent except for the sound of the kettle still whistling in the kitchen, and Emily, after a long, heavy breath, turned to turn off the stove. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was no longer refusal either. Later that evening, they sat beneath the backyard tree, where dusk colored the sky with soft lilac hues. Vivian hadn't left, and Emily hadn't asked her to. Noah toddled around the grass with a sock in his hand, his laughter rising now and then like a breeze. Vivian watched him with a hunger she didn't mask, one born not from lack of love, but regret. "I thought if I distanced myself," she said quietly, "it would teach you a lesson. But all it taught me was how far I could fall from my own child." Emily leaned back against the trunk, arms wrapped around her knees. "I waited for a call, a visit, even a letter. Nothing came." Vivian's eyes glistened. "Every time I picked up the phone, I'd hear your voice in my head. And I'd hang up. Cowardice dressed as pride. That's what I chose." Emily didn't respond right away. She looked at her son, then at her mother. "He doesn't know you," she said evenly. "But I won't teach him to hate you either." Vivian nodded slowly. "I don't expect grace. I'd like the chance to earn my way into his story, even if it's as a quiet chapter." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "He calls me Mama now, said it last week." Vivian's face crumpled into a fragile smile. "Then you're already the kind of mother I never managed to be." Emily's walls began to lower, not all the way, but enough to let one door open. "You can stay for dinner," she said. "It's just rice and stew." Vivian wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "It sounds like everything." As they walked back toward the house, Noah stumbled over a patch of grass, and both women rushed to steady him. Their hands met briefly on his tiny shoulders, and in that simple contact, a wound that had lingered for years began its slow and tentative closing. The manila envelope lay unopened on the kitchen table. Emily had found it that morning, slid under the front door with a single post-it attached. "This is yours now." Her hands trembled slightly as she peeled the flap open. Inside was a lease, her name printed clearly at the top in firm, professional typeface. Not John's, not a trust fund, not a sponsor. Emily Dawson, 6 months secured. Renewal optional, signed, notarized, and sealed. She stared at the paper, her breath catching. This wasn't temporary kindness anymore. This was stability. A chance to claim something as her own. She walked out to the porch where John stood watching Noah attempt to kick a ball slightly larger than his balance could handle. "You left this," she said, holding up the envelope. John glanced at it, then nodded. "Thought it was time." Emily folded her arms. "Why not keep it in your name?" He met her eyes. "Because you're not a guest anymore." Her throat tightened, and she looked down, blinking hard. "I don't know what to say." John smiled gently. "Then don't say anything. Just keep building the life you fought for." She sank into the porch chair beside him, the paper resting on her lap. "For so long, it felt like I was squatting in someone else's mercy. But this," she tapped the lease, "this feels different. Like the ground beneath me isn't shifting anymore." John tilted his head, watching her. That's what home should feel like. They sat in the quiet as Noah toppled over and giggled on the grass. For the first time in years, Emily felt something deeper than relief. She felt rooted. The dining table was modest, a fold-out with slightly uneven legs, but it held a kind of joy that made the food taste better. Emily had spent the afternoon cooking, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a scarf, Noah babbling at her feet with 2 wooden spoons. The stew simmered to perfection, and the rice fluffed just right. When Vincent entered with John in tow, his surprise was plain. "You cooked this?" he asked, incredulous as he took in the spread. "Every bit," Emily said with a grin. "And I promise the meat's not burnt." John chuckled softly, helping set out plates. It was the first time all three sat at the same table, and the air was filled with quiet laughter, clinking spoons, and the occasional baby shriek as Noah discovered joy in flinging tiny grains of rice. Halfway through the meal, Vincent leaned back, patting his stomach. "This beats every restaurant John drags me to." Emily laughed. "Well, this kitchen doesn't come with valet parking, but it's bio hunger." John looked around the table, his eyes soft. "I forgot what this felt like," he murmured. "Just people. Sharing something without agenda." Emily looked at him, tilting her head. "You've built towers, John. But have you ever built a dining table with memories?" He nodded slowly. "Once, a long time ago. And I didn't realize how much I missed it until tonight." Vincent raised his glass of water. To this table, uneven, a little wobbly, but standing. Emily raised hers too, like the people sitting around it. And as they toasted with water and stew-stained napkins, it felt, for all three of them, like family wasn't something you're born into. Sometimes it's the people who show up, stay late, and ask for seconds. The auditorium was packed. Camera crews lined the back wall, and flashes clicked in staccato bursts as John Maxwell stood behind the podium, adjusting the mic with a slow breath. This wasn't a product launch. There were no slides, no branding. Just a man in a dark blazer and a navy shirt, stepping out of the silence he had built around himself for a decade. 10 years ago, he began, I lost my family. And for 10 years, I let success distract me from the hollow space their absence left behind. The crowd stilled. His voice didn't waver. But something changed this year. Or rather, someone did. In the front row, Vincent watched quietly. Emily wasn't there. John had asked her permission to speak, but she had declined the spotlight. Her story, she said, belonged to the quiet. But his didn't. Not anymore, John continued. A woman asked me for leftovers. That's how it started. But what she really gave me was something I hadn't felt in years, purpose. Her resilience, her dignity, her strength. Reminded me what it means to fight for life when no one's watching. She didn't ask to be saved. She just needed to be seen. A hush swept the room. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, breath held. "I'm not sharing this to make headlines," John said. "I'm sharing it because we live in a world where we step over people who would change us if only we stopped to listen. She changed me." He stepped back from the mic, letting his final words rest in the silence. "We can build towers, fortunes, tech revolutions. But none of it means anything if we forget how to love." As he exited the stage, the applause came not in thunder, but in slow, rising waves. John didn't smile for the cameras. He smiled only when he got back to the house with yellow curtains, where Noah ran to greet him, and Emily handed him a steaming cup of tea without a word. He didn't need applause. He had something better now. He had peace. The park was quiet that morning, the breeze crisp with the promise of early spring. The same bench where John had first sat beside Emily months ago now held the warmth of shared memories. Emily pushed Noah gently in his stroller, a faded blanket draped over his lap, his hands gripping a plastic giraffe. John waited ahead, standing beside the bench with his hands tucked into his coat pockets. He turned as she approached, his face more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. No armor, no distance. Just him. "You called this a walk," Emily said with a half smile. "It is," he replied, "but I brought something else along for the walk." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, not velvet, not flashy. Just simple leather, aged like something that had waited its whole life to be used. Emily blinked, heart thudding as she stared at the box in his palm. "John," she whispered. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked. "This isn't about rescuing you. It never was. You've already saved yourself." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Then why now?" He took a breath. "Because you saved me too, in a way I didn't think was still possible." He opened the box, revealing a thin gold band, a quiet ring, not grand but honest. "This is me asking if I can keep walking beside you. Not above you, not ahead, just beside." Emily reached out and touched the box gently, then closed it and took his hand instead. "Yes," she said simply, "but not because I need saving, and not because I need a happy ending." She paused, smiling softly. "I just want a true one." Behind them, Noah let out a squeal as a squirrel darted past, oblivious to the moment's wait. But John and Emily only laughed, because in truth, they finally felt light enough to. The backyard of the yellow-curtained house had never seen so many flowers. Wild sprigs of rosemary and lavender tucked into mason jars lined the makeshift aisle, while a white cotton sheet swayed gently between two trees, serving as an altar. Emily stood barefoot in a simple cream dress, her curls pinned with tiny blossoms. John wore a linen shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. There were no crowds, just Vincent in a navy suit holding a camcorder, Vivian clutching a bouquet she'd arranged herself, and Noah toddling down the aisle with a ring box in hand, his steps wobbly, his smile wide. Emily crouched to scoop him up halfway through, tears already pooling in her eyes. "You brought us here, didn't you?" she whispered to him, kissing his cheek. John's eyes met hers across the space between them, full of awe, of gratitude, of quiet disbelief that this moment was really happening. The vows were spoken with no microphones, only the wind as witness. "I choose you," John said, voice low and clear, "not because I need to fix what's behind me, but because I want to build what's ahead with you." Emily's hand trembled slightly as she held his. "And I choose you," she replied, "not because you gave me a roof, but because you gave me a reason to believe love doesn't have to come after loss." When the officiant announced them husband and wife, there were no trumpets or cheers. Just the sound of Noah clapping and giggling, the way only a child can when joy has no limits. As they kissed, the wind lifted the yellow curtains inside the house. And for the first time, those walls were more than shelter. They were a beginning. After everyone left, John and Emily stood barefoot in the grass, holding hands, watching Noah chase fireflies. "Think he'll remember this?" John asked. Emily leaned against him. "Maybe not today, but he'll feel it for the rest of his life." And as the stars blinked open in the sky, it was clear this wasn't just an ending. It was a home, at last. Here's the Bible verse for the story Isaiah 58, verse 10. "If you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, Then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. Explanation. This verse mirrors the heart of John Maxwell's journey, from a man closed off in his grief to someone who pours himself out in quiet service to another. It reflects how acts of unseen compassion, when done from a place of genuine humanity rather than pity, can bring both healing to the giver and light to the recipient. Emily's strength and dignity embody the oppressed who do not ask for pity but for presence, and John becomes a light in her darkness, just as she becomes one in his. Moral of the story: healing comes not through rescue, but through being seen, respected, and loved without conditions. This story reminds us that true compassion is not loud, it's consistent. John didn't save Emily. She had already chosen survival. But he saw her not as a project or a charity case, but as a human being. And that recognition became her anchor. In return, Emily offered John a new kind of family, one built not from blood or obligation, but from quiet moments of trust, shared meals, and the courage to begin again. It teaches us that we are not defined by what we've lost, but by the grace we give and receive along